Welcome to Edison Open Forum Cannabinoids 2021. My name is Vivienne Parry. Now, legalization, increasing acceptance and demand for both pharmaceutical and consumer products mean the cannabinoid industry is booming. By 2026, the global market is estimated to be worth $60 billion. But biosynthesis could take it to new heights. Edison Open Forum asked the brightest minds in CBD what they think the impact of biosynthesis will be and what's next for their sector. With me is Jim Mish, CEO of the 22nd Century Group. Jim, hello, and you've got a fascinating company in this space. Tell us more about it.
Well, hello, everyone, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite, and happy to talk about 22nd Century Group and our franchise, as we call it, in the cannabis and hemp space. And truly in the biosynthetic space as well, as it turns out from a technological approach basis. But at its core, 22nd Century is a plant-based biotechnology company. In addition to cannabis and hemp, we focus on tobacco and hops, all of which are alkaloid-based plants, all of which we've developed a technology to modulate greatly up and down, different components up and down, for a wide variety of end-use markets, including clinical pharmaceutical, recreational, medical OTC, and across the consumer product space. So we do utilize, to an extent, a biosynthetic approach, but differently than the mainstream biosynthetic technology is utilized, although we own strong intellectual property in that matter and also participate, and we can talk more about that. But at our core, we utilize biosynthetic technology in the plant to utilize cellular genomics in order to modulate the plant itself versus what I call a mainstream or a primary biosynthetic route, which is designed to take relatively low-cost sugars and with yeast and enzymes convert them directly to a cannabinoid. So we have IP around that. We partner in the marketplace with that IP, but our primary is to take that same biosynthetic technology and put it in the plant and let the plant do the work that nature allows.
And you've got a huge experience in this, haven't you? Particularly with tobacco and with other plants. So just tell us what you do with that and how that could then translate into hemp and cannabis.
Sure. So in tobacco, our primary mission really for the company is to reduce the harm caused by cigarette smoking and the combination of combustible cigarettes with standard nicotine levels. What we've done through a non-GMO approach in tobacco, which is again an alkaloid-based plant, is to dramatically reduce the levels of nicotine to 0.5 milligrams per gram of tobacco. That particular amount is very harmonized with our strains, and it's a magical number that is 95% less nicotine than a standard cigarette and meets what FDA is putting out as guidelines as far as a non-addictive cigarette. So we're working through with the FDA for various marketing authorizations that we feel we're very close on. And we'll put a brand of cigarettes out there that has very low nicotine content, not yield, but content that's derived from the plant, and meets the standards being set by FDA for non-addictive levels. We do other things in tobacco with this approach, including protein modulation for pharmaceutical and vaccine uses, for example. And then we have applied that technology and then have licensed what we call the Anandia IP, which is a biosynthetic cannabis and hemp technology to utilize, again, in the plant. So the Anandia IP basically is designed to take, again, low-cost sugar, convert them with yeast and enzymes and into cannabinoids. Now, we've chosen to support that with other partners such as Aurora LP up in Canada. And in the meantime, we've taken that same biosynthetic technology and put it into the plant to modulate the plant anywhere of raising things like CBG and CBD up or down. More importantly, dramatically increasing THC levels up or down. We've learned how to modulate the plant in very many ways within really a 2-year development cycle. And that can feed into all these various end-use markets. And then we've translated that into the hops plant, which is really just a sibling of cannabis, very similar in nature, very similar ability to modulate the plant really at will.
It's really extraordinary technology, and presumably we're recording this in the week of COP26. Presumably, the alkaloid contents of these plants is not the only thing that you're seeking to modify, because you would also be wanting to use as little water, as little pesticides, and all those things. And that kind of thing can be engineered into a plant using your technology, I presume.
Exactly. We look at, on top of the alkaloid contents, we look at disease resistance, drought tolerance, being able to grow with lower amounts of water from an ESG basis, more sustainable farming technologies where pesticides and more biodynamic approach can be utilized. So we try to work with our customers and partners to determine what the value proposition is for them. And it could be typically it is a combination of modulated alkaloids along with some environmental or yield improvement aspect. And then we feed that into our upfront innovation engine. And what comes out within roughly a 2-year period is an optimized strain that covers, checks all those boxes.
And of course, it's critical for many companies that are buying the plants for then to then do with what they are going to do with it, that the THC content is negligible to zero.
Yeah, in the case of in the United States, for example, where the interest is in other cannabinoids like CBG and CBD, we want to get to non-detectable levels of THC, and our technology has demonstrated the capability of doing that. In fact, the strains that we're just growing and harvesting now in our Colorado farm have undetectable levels of THC in them. So that's for the U.S. market, and for the the consumer products market, especially with athletes, taking these products, are very very interested in that. At the same token, offshore in the Netherlands, and going back and forth between the Netherlands and the Southern Hemisphere and Canada, we have strains with disruptively high THC levels, nearing high 40%, approaching 50% levels. And in that case, we've also modulated up other cannabinoids to allow for the entourage effect, in spite of the fact that THC levels are very high. And that allows for a more consumer-friendly recreational usage. So that's just 2 examples of we can modulate that alkaloid up dramatically or down dramatically, and then more importantly, offer a strain that is optimized to be able to be grown outside or in greenhouses that is very harmonized in growth size and much easier to cultivate.
Now, you talk about the entourage effect, and that gets to the heart of a very interesting issue in this whole cannabinoid sector, which is that with biosynthesis, you can, of course, produce whatever cannabinoid you want, by the vat load. But lots of people would say it's the entourage effect of the whole plant. It's not just an individual cannabinoid that is really having the effect that people are wanting from these products.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in the entourage effect, but I'm learning a lot from our relationship. We come at this from a very comprehensive basis. So in our innovation network, we have an exclusive arrangement with a group by the name of Cannabinoids in Rochester, New York. And what Cannabinoids allows us to do is to truly understand how different cannabinoids or mixes of cannabinoids impact receptors in the endosystem of the human body, right? So there's no doubt that there is an entourage effect when several cannabinoids are combined. What we're learning, though, that the receptors are fairly, simple-minded, let's say. And if you overwhelm those receptors with a full spectrum entourage effect, it will really work against the efficacy of the therapeutic you're trying to get. So the trick is to understand not only which combinations are ideal, but to understand that more is not necessarily better, that you have to select the right, handful of cannabinoids to truly optimize the entourage effect. So I'll give you an example. I come out of the pharmaceutical industry, and I come out of the synthetic THC which is, pharmaceutically derived THC. Starting materials or raw materials are natural, and then you physically combine them in a pharmaceutical method to get ultra pure THC, for example. Now that is used for cancer patients to treat chemotherapy recovery, get the appetite recovered. But when you take pure THC, the side effects of it are pretty dramatic. Yes, it does improve your appetite, but it comes with side effects of severe headaches and what have you. So the human receptor needs an entourage effect. If you start to combine that then with CBD, CBN, and some magical ratios, it improves the patient or consumer experience. But a full spectrum overwhelms the receptor, and the efficacy goes down dramatically. So what we're learning is, yes, the entourage effect is for real. The science behind it has not been really well documented. We want to be thought leaders in that with our partnership with Cannabinoids. And it's more of optimizing a handful of cannabinoids to optimize either the recreational experience or the pharmaceutical therapeutic experience.
I want to get on to the impact of biosynthesis, but I can't resist it, with somebody so into plants here. This difference between a cannabis plant, a marijuana plant, a hemp plant, people call the same plant by many different names. What are we talking about?
Well, really, at the end of the day, I try to simplify everything, and the family of cannabis really falls into two categories. One that produces naturally very little, but detectable levels of THC if you don't optimize the plant. That's hemp. All right. So hemp will naturally, if left unoptimized, could grow north of the 0.3% limit, set by controlled substance acts around the country, especially in the U.S. As that level approaches 0.3%, the plant becomes that much more unstable. So you have to still optimize hemp, but hemp naturally grows relatively low levels of THC. Then there's marijuana, which is on the other side of the fence. That is naturally growing 10, 20% THC, and that one could be modularized. So the way we tend to think about it is under the cannabis family, there's marijuana, there's hemp. In the US, we focus entirely on hemp, non-THC based on the legislation. But offshore in R&D, we do R&D in the Netherlands and feed that into our subsidiary in Canada and offshore in other countries in order to promote and drive the recreational and medical OTC marijuana version that has the higher levels of THC.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Now, what do you think the impact of biosynthesis is going to be? Because your company has gone down a very particular route, down the plant route, doing what yeast and bacteria can do in vats, but in plants. How do you think biosynthesis is going to impact your business?
Yeah, let me, and I appreciate the question, and I'll take the opportunity just to do a 1-minute, discussion on the different technologies, because I think it gets blurred in. It's getting blurred out there as far as what biosynthetic is. All right, so there's different ways to arrive at a cannabinoid or an alkaloid. What I described before, this purely synthetic basis, which is taking raw materials that are natural, pharmaceutically combining them, and creating things like THC, CBD directly, right? So my former venture at a company called Puricis was dedicated to the synthetic approach for clinical pharmaceutical. It's a wonderful technology. It's ultra pure material for clinical pharmaceutical uses, and there's 150 clinical trials going on out there using the synthetic approach. And it has some drawbacks, though. It's very expensive at the smaller scale, and that's really the primary drawback. But it has its place, and it's wonderful technology, right? Then you get into the biosynthetic space, and there's really two ways to come at a biosynthetic approach. One, what I call a pure play biosynthetic approach, is what I described before, taking cheap sugar and with the development of enzymes and different yeasts, converting that directly to CBD, CBG. Now that's a very, it's been very well chased after by dozens of groups that are out there. It's very challenging to scale that up at the true commodity level that's required. And many have tried and many are failing. Quite frankly, the group that's in the lead from that approach, I would have to point towards Ginkgo Bioworks and Kronos. That's the pure play biosynthetic approach. Now, the Anandia IP that we've licensed and we share with Aurora is really focused on that approach, right? Now, there's another biosynthetic way to come at it, and that's the way we utilize it, that same technology, but inside the plant. What we have found is it's much more controllable. It ends up being a natural product because you're now, capable of selling as flour or distillate or isolate. So it's a much more natural approach, and we feel we can do this in a fraction of the time, 2-year development cycle versus 5 to 7 years in some of the other biosynthetic space. I think ultimately, biosynthetic has its place, and I think, and we're trying to support that in specifics of CBD, for example, CBG, as the scale up continues onward. But we think it's still a few years away from that, and I do give the inside track to Kronos and Ginkgo at the moment with that approach.
It's fascinating.
And then there's standard breeding techniques, which are we feel are outdated. So just to give you a flavor of the biosynthetic space.
So basically, you can do it in the plant, which is what you're doing. You can employ bacteria and yeasts to do it for you in a vat, or you can just go the straight synthetic route and just manufacture the, doing sort of chemical methodologies.
Yeah.
So you've got those 3 approaches.
Yeah.
So really, there's a huge market out there. You're very well placed to look at the whole sector. Where do you think it's going, and where do you think it'll be in 5 years' time?
Well, I think it has so much potential, but a few things have to happen in order to really allow it to reach its full potential. Right. So these, cannabinoid alkaloids are extremely efficacious, and as we talked about, on an entourage basis, can be very impactful. But in order to really free up the technologies, standards are going to have to be set for the industry. We're in the midst of that with working with the National Institute of Standards and Technologies in the U.S., NIST, that we just announced, where we're establishing the ingredient standards to guarantee quality to our customers and guarantee to the consumer that they're getting what's on the label. A lot of work has to be done with that to truly unleash these efficacious products into the marketplace that will then be supported by groups like FDA or EFSA in Europe. So we want to be at the forefront, and we in fact are in the forefront. If you presume that then gets established, that the standards are set, that the safety standards are set, that the consumer will then see the perceived benefit and the value propositions for real, then in areas such as the consumer products, personal care, beverage, food, nutritional supplements, there are tremendous opportunities there, utilizing primarily the hemp plant that is, obviously very low in THC. You get into the THC-bearing marijuana plants. Now you're into truly differential medical OTC capabilities and truly clinical pharmaceuticals. The clinical pharmaceutical trials that are going on now are extraordinary. It's vastly dominated by the synthetic cannabinoids as the ingredient because of the ultra purity needed for these clinical trials. But as nature catches up and you can offer a harmonized, consistent ingredient from an optimized plant, well, the pharmaceutical industry certainly always wants to opt for a natural ingredient versus a synthetic ingredient. Right? And if you can do that, then it opens up the door for the pharmaceutical space. So the way we look at it, it's a global business. There are 7 end-use markets that are capable of growing dramatically, well into the double digits with very high margin. We want to be positioned to take advantage of all those markets on a global basis. And that's what our technology allows. We're not in this to make formulated products. Our business model is to license this technology and then license it to those who have the infrastructure and the channels to market, and live off of that upfront licensing fee and a royalty stream off of it, and then be able to tap into the 7 markets on a global basis as each one of them grows. And every one of them, when you take a look at it, even though it's been somewhat stagnated by legislative action or sometimes supply chain issues, they're all growing at a substantive rate because the consumer benefit is there as long as the quality and the quantity can show up. And that's how we come into the picture to help our customers bring the higher quality and the quantity to a market that undoubtedly will grow.
And presumably that's really where the regulation comes in, because there's a bit of the Wild West out there with some of the smaller companies making really wild claims.
Yeah, and that's the standards I was talking about. Today, there's no standard set up in the U.S. for a cannabinoid ingredient. So how do you expect the FDA then to lean in and set safety standards? They're shooting in the dark. So, we're working with customers to demonstrate that our technology can allow them a higher quality, really at a lower cost and more efficiency, but then also work with NIST in this case to establish the industry standards. And we'll obviously be helping setting those standards that then enables the FDA to set safety guidelines and labeling guidelines so that you actually know what you're getting in your product. I mean, half of the products that are tested out there, more than half, probably close to 80, 90% of the products tested in the US from my former job, was more hemp oil than any CBD or CBG ingredient, right? So
and I suspect some may have nothing in it at all.
Yeah, it's usually just hemp oil, but with claims of CBD content and so on, and we want to help rectify that, because the efficacy, when you get it right, and those who are doing it right and seeing the repurchase of the product, there's no doubt about the efficacy if the product's actually in there at the level and the quality it's on the label.
So this is a fascinating conversation, but we must draw it to a conclusion. And I'd really like you to put the investment case to potential buyers for the 22nd Century Group. What have you got coming up? What is your investment case?
Look, the investment thesis is really about methodology and time of development, speed to market. We have mastered the ability to modulate the cannabis plant, whether it's hemp or marijuana, at will, right? We can do that, not only harmonize the plant, improve yield, disease resistance, what have you. We can do that in roughly a 2-year cycle, which is a fraction of the time that standard breeding or even the pure biosynthetic approach will take. So our value proposition is plant modulation, customized at a very rapid basis, and to bring in the knowledge of the science behind these cannabinoids and how to optimize them from, as we've been saying, an entourage effect, et cetera. Our business model then allows us to be the intel inside, in essence, for every finished good out there going into these 7 high growth markets around the world. And every one of them has a different timeline. Clinical pharmaceutical will take longer than, say, the beverage market or even the recreational market. But we have a strong pipeline to go after all these end use markets with an intel inside approach from the technology of the plant itself, combined, really with a highly scientific and comprehensive methodology of getting there. And that's what we're excited about, not only in cannabis and hemp, but certainly in tobacco, which is the foundation of the company, and even more so in hops that are very, very ripe for disruptive ag technologies to come forward.
Jim Mish, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. What a fascinating company 22nd Century Group is. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, and thank you for the invite. Anytime.